Good afternoon, everyone. This is Terry Behrens, and welcome to our quarterly Foundation Review webinar. Thanks for joining us for Growing a Marketplace for Impact Investing. This is Terry Behrens. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of the Foundation Review, and I also direct the Institute for Foundation and Donor Learning here at the Johnson Center for Philanthropy, and I will be moderating the conversation today. I'm going to begin with a few housekeeping items, and then I'll introduce our three speakers, and we'll hear from them, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end of our time together. So in terms of housekeeping items, the phone lines are muted, and we encourage you to send in your messages or questions via chat. So at any time during the webinar, please feel free to send in your comments or questions, and I will tee those up for our speakers at the appropriate time. Questions of clarification I will pose to them right away. Otherwise, we'll hold questions for discussion until the end of our time together. The webinar is being recorded, and everyone who has registered for it will receive a link to be able to access that on YouTube. And we will also send copies of the PowerPoint slides to all registered participants. So today's webinar is based on the article Laying the Groundwork for a National Impact Investing Marketplace that appeared in our most recent issue of the Foundation Review. The article itself is open access and can be reached at the link on your screen. And we hope that if you have not done so, you will log on and download that and read the full article. Today we're going to be hearing from the three authors, and I'm going to introduce them. Stephanie Gripney is the founder and executive director and the creative force behind the Impact Finance Center. She founded that in 2013. Stephanie is an academic entrepreneur, a philanthropic advisor, a researcher, and an educator in the field of impact investing. She has about 20 years of experience at the intersection of business and natural resources, with previous work for organizations including a private equity fund, the Nature Conservancy, the USDA Forest Service, the Department of Energy, Oak Ridge Laboratory, and several universities. Stephanie's received her PhD from the Boone and Crockett Wildlife Conservation Program at the University of Montana, and also holds degrees from the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point and from Utah State University. Stephanie is an Aspen Institute Environment Forum Scholar, as well as holding several fellowships, including a Ford Foundation Community Forestry Fellowship. Our second speaker is Kathleen Merchant, who recently stepped down as president and CEO of the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, where she served from 1997 to 2015. Kathy was director of the Pew Charitable Trust Neighborhood Preservation Initiative prior to that, and was also a partner in the New Haven-based consulting firm Holt, Wexler & Merchant. She is a senior fellow for the National Strive Together Cradle to Career Network, where she serves as advisor to communities devoted to increasing the pace and scale of student success. Now working as a philanthropy consultant, Kathy specializes in impact investing, collective impact, community development, and other areas of strategic philanthropy for both foundations and nonprofit organizations. Kathy also serves as a senior advisor for executive leadership institutes offered through CF Leads for community foundations, and is also a senior advisor for the Impact Finance Center, which is what brings her to our webinar today. Kathy has degrees from Indiana University and the University of Connecticut, but most interestingly, she holds a diploma in wine and spirits from the London-based Wine and Spirit Education Trust. So I hope you have a chance to have a glass of wine with her at some point. Joanne Kelly, our third speaker, is the executive director of the Colorado Association of Funders, which provides education and advocacy for Colorado's philanthropic sector. Before transitioning to her leadership role at CAF, Joanne spent much of her career in journalism with news agencies, magazines, and daily newspapers in Denver, Washington, D.C., New York City, and Chicago, reporting on a wide range of subjects, from Wall Street to high technology to the social profit sector. Joanne also has several years of working for a management consultancy, planning and hosting CEO summits and educational seminars for diverse groups of leaders. Kathy currently serves on the board of the Washington, D.C.-based Forum of Regional Associations of Grantmakers, which is a network of philanthropy-serving organizations, and previously served on the board of the Colorado Society of Association Executives. Joanne has a Master of Science from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism and is a graduate of Wells College. So before I turn the webinar over to them, we'd like to find out a little bit more about who's on the webinar today. So I'd like to ask you to take a moment and just click on the type of organization that best represents the organization that you work for. Okay, so we have a good chunk from universities and then community and family foundations, as well as individual consultants represented on the call. All right, next we'd like to find out more about what your role is in that organization. So again, please click the answer that corresponds to your role. And we have primarily directors, executive director, program director, with some involved in other C-suite level work and some in investments. And then finally, we'd like to learn a little bit about your experience, your familiarity with impact investing. So we have a highly scientific range here from 1, I've heard the term, so in other words, you're pretty much a newcomer to the field, all the way up to 5 if you're an expert. I'd like to again ask you to select the one that best represents your familiarity and take a look at that. Okay, so for the most part, our participants are somewhere on the middle of that spectrum with some familiarity with impact investing, and hopefully by the end of this, although we're not expecting this to make you an expert, maybe you'll nudge up 1 notch on our scale. Whoops, sorry about that. Oh, now somebody else is clicking, sorry about that. So again, this webinar is going to be based on the article in the Foundation Review, and I'm going to turn it over to, I believe Kathy is actually going to be starting us off.
I am going to start this off. Thank you very much, Terry. I'm having a little bit of trouble advancing the slides, though. I don't seem to have the co-presenter tool. So if somebody could advance the slide for me, that would be great. Thank you so much. So first, I just wanted to give you a little overview of what we plan to cover today. Again, I'd like to reinforce what Terry said, especially because we made it possible for everyone to download the article at no cost. We hope that you will take advantage of that. And I'm going to give just a couple of highlights of the things that are actually covered in the article. The meat of our presentation will be provided by Dr. Stephanie Gripney, who's going to talk a little bit about impact investing just to make sure we're all on the same page, and then to explain both her experience in Colorado and the insights that has created about the need for a national impact investing marketplace. That will be the bulk of our presentation today. After Dr. Gripney finishes, I'm going to talk a little bit more about why foundations might take a particularly keen interest in impact investing and in the notion of the national marketplace. And then I'll hand it off to Joanne Kelly, who will then talk about the role and the existing and potential roles for regional associations of grant makers. We'll have time for a Q&A at the end, and I believe that Terry and her team will be monitoring the chat boxes for questions along the way. So let me just give you a very short overview and some of the key takeaways that we presented in our article. If you're on this call, you probably already know that impact investing is a practice that's really gaining significant momentum, especially in the past 5 to 7 years. Documentation of that by the GIN, for example, shows that the amount of money and the number of institutional and individual investors is skyrocketing forward with significant predictions for each future year. So that's very exciting. It's no longer an alternative one-off kind of strategy. It's really coming in to the mainstream. But one of the chief barriers that are identified both in research and in practice is that there is no easy way for investors and social enterprises to find each other. If you listen to investors, they might say, I just cannot find qualified social enterprises in which to invest. And social enterprises might say, but I really don't know how to find either individual or institutional investors. So that led the folks in Colorado, the Impact Finance Center, to identify the need for a cost-effective way to put those two groups together with some vetting of social enterprises and some education for investors so that they can make the most of that moment when they're together. We're fond of calling the Colorado Impact Days and Initiative from 2016 the Alpha Test. Later in our presentation, we will invite all of you to join us for the Beta Test, which will be Colorado Impact Days and Initiative for 2017. That is scheduled this fall. And all of that inspired the notion that if it can be done in Colorado and if it can be such an inspiring and generative type of activity, that it just might be possible to replicate this all across the country. With that, I think it's time to kick the slide over to Dr. Gripney, again, to do the definitions and explain the enterprise.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kathy. Again, my name is Dr. Stephanie Gripney, and I am the founder of the Impact Finance Center. And sorry, I'm moving the slide backwards. Thank you. And we are an academic center that focuses on impact investing. And you might be familiar with other academic impact investing centers. That would be David Wood at Harvard with the IRI, or that would be Kathy Clark at Duke. We're a little unusual in two ways, in that we are actually fiscally sponsored by Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors as a special project with Sustainable Endowments Institute. So we're technically outside the university, and we are also multi-university. So we have a partnership with the SEED Conference, which it's housed out of Colorado State University, and it represents 250 business school faculty throughout the world. And the reason we did that is in 2012, we thought to ourselves, how do we design an academic center so that we have the best parts of the university without the bureaucracy and the overhead rate? So that allows us to be at an 8% overhead rate versus 52, and it allows us to work with students from anywhere around the country, or faculty from anywhere around the country, or world, I should say. So we have, at any time, most of our students are from Colorado, but last year we had a student from Harvard and another fellow from Chapman University. And we really do three key things. We do research and thought leadership, we do education, and then we do special initiatives or projects, which, as Kathy alluded to, with the statewide marketplace of Co-Impact Days and Initiative. In some ways, you can think of us as an accelerator or incubator for the money. And for those of you who are steeped in philanthropic theory, there's this notion of capital absorption, where there is money to flow to great projects, nonprofits, for-profits, and funds. But the real sticking point on that theory is that the social ventures, and we call social ventures broadly, including nonprofits and for-profits, are not really ready to receive that capital. And so we have actually said, well, we think that is an issue, but we also think there's just as much of an issue on the capital side, that money needs to be trained, and that there's very few education opportunities or even awareness, education, capacity building opportunities for the money to actually learn how to become an impact investor. And when we say that pretty broadly on the endowment, on the grant-making philanthropic side, and also direct investing, which hopefully most of you know that for a foundation, that's a program and mission-related investment. So this year we'll probably present, there's about a core team of 10 of us, and then if you count our senior advisors like Kathy Merchant or Craig Muska or Tony Macklin, who's on the call, you count, there's about 40 plus of us with the Impact Finance Center, and we'll present to about 5,000 individuals and institutions with money. And so you can think of this as almost like an accelerator incubator for the money. And about 1 out of 10 of those individuals or institutions will say, Steph, we didn't realize we could actually do this. Can you come? Can we learn more about it? And so the Impact Finance Center does custom education, and we also have a formal course called Investor Readiness. And the conversation starts this way. It says, well, first, would you like us to work with you on your endowment? Because literally one of our tools identified a $100 million foundation was spending an extra $600,000 with their investment advisor to lose $5 million over 5 years. And we can talk about environmental, social, governance, and impact on your endowment. Are we talking about your philanthropic portfolio? Or are we talking about direct investing or program and mission-related investing of the foundation? And most of them are really coming to us for expertise on direct investing, which is the PRI, MRI capital. And so we actually start with asking them the question of, what was your financial return? We'll use this example of a $1 billion foundation, of the $1 billion foundation's endowment last year, and they'll say 2%. And now we'll actually ask you this question on the call. We ask you, we say, okay, last year you got 2% on your $1 billion foundation on your endowment. How much money did you give away? And they said $35 million. And then we ask them, what is the financial return of the grant to the foundation? And the hint is that we're actually looking for a percentage here. So take a second and fill out that number. I don't know, Mike and I are playing with this, so there we can see the numbers. I'm not sure, can the rest of the respondents actually see the numbers? Can somebody write that in chat? And sorry, Alan, the slides are not advancing right now. So we have 11 people responding, and it looks like we have a mix. We have about a quarter of the people saying 0%, not applicable. We actually have 4 people with the correct answer, and the correct answer is we're going to get to you in a little longer story. Just Kathy and I were wondering how many people would understand this. So we basically say at this point to the foundation, we said, most people say 0%, just like about half of you said right here. And we said, well, that's interesting. Last year the Ford Foundation gave the Impact Finance Center a $20,000 grant. Wouldn't a 0% return mean that a year later the Impact Finance Center would give back that $20,000 to the Ford Foundation? Isn't that a 0% return? And at which point they say, yes, you're correct. I said, so when the Ford Foundation gives the Impact Finance Center $20,000 in a grant and we keep it as a nonprofit, what's that financial return? And they're like, negative? And I'm like, yes, correct, negative 100% financial return. And we say, here's where it doesn't matter if you're a foundation, a family office, a low-income individual, a middle-income individual. Somewhere along the way we bifurcated our money. And we've forgotten the money that we give away through donations, grants, our philanthropy, is an investment with a negative 100% financial return, attempting high positive impact. And we've also forgotten that our investments have impact. And so what we do at the Impact Finance Center is we actually work with money to say, what would happen if we didn't bifurcate it? What if we looked at every single grant, direct investment, program and mission-related investments, and endowment capital, look at it through the lens of impact, financial return, risk, and liquidity. Lots of really interesting things can happen when you reunite that capital instead of artificially bifurcating it. And at which point we talked them through, they said, well, how would this work with us? And the easiest way to start with a foundation is ask what they give money to. We say, what do you grant money to? And they say, we do partial scholarships, school facilities, economic development, and hospices. And we said, well, that's interesting. What you're telling us is you're giving a student an $8,000 scholarship when that same student has a $40,000 student loan at 8% interest. Do you know if you gave them a $48,000 student loan at 1% interest, you would increase your financial return from negative 100 to 1, which is 101% financial return. You'd grow your endowment, you'd recycle the principal for another student, and you'd save the student more than the $8,000 you're giving them just in interest. And then they say school facilities. We say, well, you know, a typical school facility or nonprofit or health clinic They have a $5 million mortgage at 6 to 12% interest instead of giving 5 schools $1 million at negative 100% in a grant. Have you considered giving them a $5 million mortgage at 2%? You get 102% financial return and save the school or the facility millions of dollars. And then we say economic development. And we tell them, did you know since 1969 with the Tax Reform Act law, you've had a tax incentive to actually give a grant, a loan, or an equity investment to a for-profit entity if it furthers the charitable purpose of the mission of the foundation. And that in the last administration there were 2 additional revenue rulings to encourage this behavior. They said no one told us. And then we say hospices. The bills come in December and the reimbursements don't come until June. And let's say they have a 9% line of credit at the bank. We say, you know, a negative 10% investment return, when's the last time somebody else came to you and said, we have a great negative 10% investment opportunity? Technically, a negative 10% investment opportunity, if you're playing with negative 100% money, is a 90% financial increase to getting your money back. It would save the hospice 19% in interest. So that's what we do at the Impact Finance Center. So we're going to go through a couple, as Kathy said, some basic introduction slides just to make sure we're on the same page. We say investing is the act of committing capital with the endeavor of getting a financial return, income, or profit for it. And that impact investing is investing with a financial return, but it's also with the intention to generate measurable, beneficial, social, environmental, community returns alongside that. And we believe that every single investment is technically an impact investment. Some are just having positive or negative impacts on community and the environment. Some of you are probably familiar with this. This is a modified version of the Heron Foundation Continuum of looking at our money in one discrete bucket of capital, where on the left, if you're a foundation, that's grants and individual donations, and then we have direct investments, angel, mission, program-related investments, MRIs and PRIs. We have screen funds, and those can be positive and negative screen funds, which we're not going to get into on this presentation, and then we finally have conventional investments. And so on the left-hand side of that one bucket of capital, that's motivated by social good, again, where we've forgotten that it's an investment. And on the right-hand side, it's motivated by financial returns, which in many cases we forgot that it has impact. But in reality, we divide our money into 3 categories: our grants, our direct investing, and our public. And so that's really what we work with asset owners, especially foundations, to do their impact investing strategy. So let's spend a few moments talking about direct investing first. Why do we care about direct investing? Why should foundations care about direct investing? Well, first, it can benefit the social venture tremendously. Most of the projects, nonprofits, for-profits, and funds doing the type of work that we want to see that's going to have great impact sometimes has difficulty getting access to capital. You can provide them capital at lower rates, longer time frames, essentially more favorable. And in several cases, we can use that high-risk patient capital to attract private capital. So it can be an incredible lever where a little bit of foundation capital can end up bringing in millions of dollars of conventional capital to help do things that we all care about. Why does the impact investor care about this? It can expand the philanthropic impact. It basically, because you can recycle that principle over and over again, it can leverage our assets. You can think of it kind of like venture philanthropy in that first generation money. It's a much easier transition to actually say, this is kind of how you made your money. Let's actually learn how to do philanthropy in a way that is kind of aligned with what you already know how to do. We also have increased accountability. At the Impact Finance Center this last year, we had a donor take $100,000 in their Schwab Charitable Trust and transfer it to the Rose Community Foundation, and they did a 2.5% loan to our nonprofit, the Impact Finance Center. And that donor I hang out with, or impact investor, I see a couple times a month because she's deeply involved and embedded in our organization and wants to see us do well. And so because that money can be recycled and it's often not a one-and-done relationship, you see increased accountability and a multiplier effect. What's exciting about impact investing is if you can, whatever tools you have on the investment side, you can use on the philanthropic side. So you can use it for projects like affordable housing, nonprofits, lines of credit, loans to expand operations, social enterprises, and also for-profits. Any vehicle on the investment side you can use for impact investing, from low interest loans, credit enhancements, guarantees, lines of credit, mortgage financing, and interim financing. Now we're going to switch from direct investment side really to more of the endowment, and even go up one level of talking about governance. It surprises me, to be completely honest with you. When I say governance, I taught this last week, and most people were thinking about the environmental social governance ranking that you do on public companies in your endowment. But in this case, we're actually talking about governance in terms of how you actually design the rules of the foundation that cover not just your endowment, but also your philanthropic portfolio and direct investing portfolio. And these become foundational sets of rules. And we believe in a process that we basically have borrowed from Europe using investment beliefs. And we start with a starter kit of about 30 of those. And they basically say, this is how we think the markets work. This is how we think impact works. And it takes some upfront time to get the board in alignment about actually getting educated and coming up to consensus on these investment beliefs. But we believe if you spend that upfront time, then your investment advisor has really clear direction, your program officers have really clear direction, and those working on your direct investments have really clear direction. And that better governance, if you spend that time up front, will actually lead to better financial return, reduce risk, and increase impact. And so that course that we do, we have actually turned it last year. We developed about 5 short courses. They're 4 hours to 8-hour courses, and the course we have for philanthropists and investors is called Investor Readiness. And the framework of this course is essentially saying, okay, let's start with the investor or the asset owner. Let's first assess our philanthropy to see if there is savings there. Why give a nonprofit like the Impact Finance Center $5,000 at negative 100% if we have to turn around and pay, in our case, a credit card at 18%. So first we want to see if there's opportunities to save your grantees money. So that's the philanthropic assessment. Then we want to also assess the investments for good decisions and skills from the investment advisor and impact. That flows into the investment policy statement. And then what you all do really well already is implement the strategy across the philanthropic portfolio, direct investing, and endowment, and of alignment. And the one piece we bring in is really on that lower right-hand corner on evaluation on the endowment alignment is this notion of decision-based attribution evaluation, which we'll talk to you about in just a second. So when we say philanthropic assessment, we would love every foundation to start asking some additional questions to their grantees, their past grantees, current grantees, and future grantees, that basically say, there's 3 ways nonprofits can participate in impact investing. Do they have existing debt, a line of credit or loan that could be refinanced? Do they have an asset like a building that could be made more efficient? Or third, do they have a concept for a social enterprise, which could be earned revenue that is aligned with goods and services to help the foundation achieve their mission, but also provide alternative earned revenue for them. So those are the 3 categories, and we believe this is a basic tool and a great way for foundations to start getting their toe into impact investing, is working with their existing grantees. So that's on the philanthropic side of the portfolio. Now we're going to switch back over to the endowment and talk about impact. Essentially, you can actually start getting these scores on individual stocks like Pfizer or Volkswagen. And these are environmental, social, governance scores. There's increasingly more data. We just met with a foundation that cares about aging yesterday, and I said, you could actually use your foundation to create a social enterprise that would start creating a report card of how public corporations are treating the aging population and sell that data to the environmental social governance data providers and start getting impact measured in public companies. And so this data actually rolls up into what we call managers, and those people are the people that select multiple stocks. And we basically have said most people don't actually have to understand the numbers, so we've color-coded ours to red, yellow, and green. And that rolls up into the endowment from that perspective. And so there's the piece, as we said, there's impact on the endowment, There's looking at making your philanthropic portfolio more efficient. And then we basically have said, how does integrating the strategy affect the foundation's bottom line? And so this is some financial modeling we've done of a $500 million foundation over 20 years. And historically, this is over 20 years, on the left, the foundation took a very conventional approach of giving away 5% in the form of grants and operating expenses. And over 20 years, they gave away $423 million in grants, had $494 million left in the endowment or the corpus. And we said, well, what would have happened if they would have taken 1% of that 5%? Let's say they cared about school facilities. Instead of giving 1% of their money as grants to school facilities, what if they would have given 3% loans to schools? How would that change the overall financials of the foundation? And because some of you may or may not know, when a program-related investment is actually paid back, the 3% income actually goes into the endowment. And then the principal basically goes back into the grant portfolio and increases your minimum distribution requirement for that next year. So if you get $1 million paid back in principal, you have to give away another $1 million that next year in the form of grants, program-related investments, or operating expenses. But in this case, over 20 years, we just keep recycling that as additional loans. And so what it's saying on this graph is that by taking a modest impact investment strategy over 20 years, a foundation can actually grow its endowment. So it will now have $529 million in its endowment versus $494. And those of you who are program officers on the line might say, but wait, you just took away our grant-making capability. And we'd say, well, hold on for a second. We say, first, you're giving the program-related investments to the same organizations that you cared about programmatically, and they're saving money on the back end. And not only that, at the end of 20 years, you still have this outstanding PRI portfolio of 3% loans, $145 million of loans. And as some of you know, if you forgive that loan portfolio or they default, technically it becomes a grant. So what this is saying is a modest impact investment strategy for a foundation over 20 years will allow them to grow their endowment, which will allow them to give away more grant money and program-related investment money, and also effectively give away more grant funding. So we believe impact investing can actually grow philanthropic capital and increase impact. And we believe that there's really, we're going to talk about a for-profit example of direct investing and then some nonprofit examples. So in the first case, we have Silvernest. And Silvernest is, we met them 2 years ago. It's led by Wendy Burkhart. She's a successful technology entrepreneur. And she decided she had done 2 technology companies so far. Her third company, she was going to have soul in it. And so what is Silvernest? I don't know how many of you have cared for your parents, but it turns out that 40% of the baby boomer population has only saved $50,000 for retirement. And half of them own their house. Every day they stay in their home, they're happier, they're healthier, and we as taxpayers save a tremendous amount of money. Silvernest is an online matchmaking platform to connect the aging population with housemates for additional income, companionship, and help around the house. And so 2 years ago when I met Wendy, she had never done a technology company that also had impact. And I said, well, it's kind of interesting because you're women-led, you're aging, intergenerational connectivity, affordable housing, economic development, and health. I said, I don't want to get your hopes up, but have you actually considered, I know you're getting ready to raise your seed round of angel investment capital. Have you considered raising money from a philanthropist or foundation? And so we went on this journey I said, we're going to give 50 presentations throughout the state of Colorado, and we need some case studies. Can we use you as a case study? And so we went on this journey with her to see could we unlock philanthropic foundation capital to invest in Silvernest. And it was fascinating for us because at the end of the day, there were so many philanthropists and donors and foundation folks that if Silvernest were a nonprofit, they would have no problem donating $25,000 to it. But when we said it's a for-profit technology play with a SaaS play with hockey stick financial returns, Airbnb meets Match.com and AARP, all of a sudden they said, well, wait, we're not an investor. And we said, well, in the first case, you're fixing your financial return at negative 100%, and you're kind of capping your impact. And in the second case, you're probably going to get a negative 100% financial return because 8 out of 10 startups fail. but you do have a 20% chance of actually getting your money back and getting more money back. And so it started to really elicit some of the differences in cultures between the for-profit world and the nonprofit world. The nonprofit world is given super high-risk capital at negative 100%, and they're told not to lever it. Don't take chances. And one of the foundations said, this is kind of strange. We don't buy a house on cash, and yet we ask the nonprofit world to work that way. And so this has led us to this notion of creating impact investing giving circles, which we'll talk about at the end of the presentation just a little bit. But can we use donor tools and donor language to actually unlock donor and foundation capital to invest in an entity regardless if it's a nonprofit or for-profit if it's aligned with the mission? So that's a for-profit example of how foundations can actually participate in impact investing. Now let's talk about nonprofits. We said there's really 3 key areas that they can actually participate in impact investing. And we like to start with a simple example of if you leave this presentation today, of what did she say? And the biggest one is a simple loan. You take a $5 million loan at 7% interest. You refinance it at 3% interest, which if a foundation's using negative 100% money is 103% financial return, you're going to save the nonprofit $2.3 million. And so in Colorado, we've been working for the last several years to actually get some of these cases off the ground. And the Impact Finance Center conceptualized and came up with a strategy that the board took over and ran with for the Museum of Contemporary Arts. And they had an $11.5 million mortgage. They were able to raise some grant funding to reduce their mortgage, but they came to a point which their mortgage was expiring, and they still needed a $5.5 million mortgage. And we were able to help create the idea that they actually were able to work with a local foundation and a couple of donors and actually get a 0% and 1% mortgages that allowed them to save $565,000 a year. So if you're a foundation that cares about the Museum of Contemporary Art, this impact investment strategy essentially created unrestricted capital for them every year. So that's an example of a loan refinance. In this case, the Impact Finance Center also not only conceptualized and led the strategy, but we worked on the design to construction of a building renovation. So this is an example of an asset to make it more efficient. And we were essentially short $6 million for the building renovation, and we had a donor that was going to give $6 million. And we encouraged them, we worked with them in the Denver Foundation and opened up a donor advised fund and said, instead of giving the nonprofit $6 million, let's give them a loan from our donor advised fund at the Denver Foundation for $9.5 million at 0% and 1%. That allowed us to save $4.5 million in interest over our conventional mortgage, and it also allowed us to take advantage of a historic tax credit for another $1.5 million. So essentially this is an example of where using a creative strategy for an asset actually saved this nonprofit $6 million over 10 years, and it also provides 100%, 101% return for the donor that actually was able to work with their local community foundation through their donor advised fund. And finally, we have a case of a social enterprise. Local Health Foundation Colorado Trust was wanting to support Mi Casa. They helped to provide their resource center for Latino population in Colorado, and they had come up with an idea to provide bookkeeping services to nonprofits and for-profits locally, and they essentially needed a line of credit to get that social enterprise going. And so Colorado Trust was able to do a program-related investment to help that social enterprise get off the ground. So those are examples of impact investing definitions, some case studies, some ideas on governance, on how we can help make things efficient and effective. And our real goal is to move massive capital. And so what is that problem? Well, there's $38 trillion in the U.S. And when we look at money, we look at pension funds and university endowments. And in this case, just to stick with the example of Silverness, we'll take AARP Foundation. And in reality, if you're dealing with the endowment side of the shop, you have to get your head behind what really their issues are. First, they have to be financed first. In the case of AARP Foundation at about $3 billion, their minimum investment size is $25 million. It can't be more than 3 to 5% of an investment opportunity. But the issue really isn't that they're against impact. They just have to meet these financial hurdles first. And so we end up having a bit of a chicken and the egg problem in that how do we actually get this money going first? Because in reality, Silvernest that I showed you earlier, they don't need money in $25 million chunks. They're a startup with seed capital, and they need money in $25,000 chunks and to get their startup going. And so in reality, we have these problems where we're leaving money, impact, and risk on the table. That's AARP Foundation in this scenario. So AARP Foundation, if we upgraded their governance, generally you could probably find 2 to 7% savings. You could increase their impact, reduce their risk. AARP Foundation, they need impact investments in the aging population. They'd love to see debt and equity billion-dollar aging opportunities. And yet Silvernest needs the social ventures. They need access to capital. So how do we do this? Well, first we upgrade governance. And so we spend a lot of time working with asset owners, individuals, and family offices and foundations to actually upgrade their governance and actually save them money, reduce their risk, increase their impact. And then we identify the social ventures and scale regionally. I'm getting the time to wrap this up. We're almost done, Terry. So this is how we're thinking about going about this. Is first we have investor education where we have governance, investment beliefs, and attribution evaluation. And if the pipes in the system were working, AARP would go to their investment advisor and go, show me the managers in aging, and they would give opportunities. And those angel investment funds would then invest in Silvernest. In reality, this is what we're seeing. There aren't very many impact investment opportunities for the foundations on the endowment side. Hence, social ventures are not getting access to capital. And so the question we've asked is that because there aren't billions of dollars of aging investment opportunities? We believe the answer is yes, there is in any of these concepts of communities of place, interest, and identity. And so we created the statewide marketplace at Co-Impact Days and Initiative, where we did 50 events throughout the state. We sourced 350 social venture opportunities and projects, nonprofits, for-profits, and funds. And happy we'll do this on another time, ended up helping catalyze for 30 to 40 social venture investments right now. And this, as Kathy said early on, is leading to the architecture of the National Impact Investment Marketplace. And we believe if you take any communities of identity, place, or interest, such as women, that there are $50 million of investments in debt and equity per state, which means there's 300 in the region, which means there's $2.5 billion in the nationally. And so I'm going to transition this to, I believe my next speaker is Jennifer.
No, it's
Kelly.
Me, Steph, it's Kathy.
Or it goes back to Kathy. So we're using these tools of
me.
investor readiness workshops, impact scans, and impact investing giving circles. And with that, I'll transition it to Kathy.
Great. So this slide is just a reminder that for foundations, there are really 2 ways, large buckets of activity for foundations to take a look at. One is, how is your main investment set up? How is your endowment and any other money that you might have invested so that it generates maximum impact? And then the second is, what happens with the money that you may grant out or other ways that you might leverage your money for impact? If somebody could get me the next slide then, please. I wanted to talk about a couple of reasons why we have come to believe that the case for impact investing is so strong. There are 6 things, there are many things, but we highlighted these 6. So quickly, every foundation has a community of interest, whether that's a geographic location, a particular population, or a particular sector. And that's really key because that focuses the impact effort on the type of outcomes that your foundation is hoping to achieve. The second and third bullets are really kind of in tandem, because if you add impact investing to the ways in which you support your community of interest, it helps to diversify and leverage the assets you have. Most people I've talked to ever are fascinated by the idea that they can put their money to work more effectively, and in the case of impact investing, do it again and again and again. The next bullet is to align your assets for what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So if you've got a community of interest and you have a population level outcome that you're trying to achieve, you can really take a look at your assets from the perspective of, have I put them to work in every possible way to get faster and closer to achieving that result. Donor engagement is an interesting opportunity, whether you're a family foundation that has, for example, a next generation coming into the governance seat, or a community foundation that has donor-advised funds. So this may be somewhat less relevant to universities and to, say, corporate entities, but perhaps not. But just next-gen donors and donor-advised fund holders are excited, in my experience, to have a new way to actually make a difference in the community where they live, or perhaps where they have moved to in retirement. And finally, impact investing will really prime the pump in your stated area of interest, your community of interest, to fuel social enterprise so that they can make the most effective use of the dollars that you have available. And you all know that the term sustainability is a pretty popular but oftentimes long stretch type of goal, because people imagine that you'll be able to generate an income stream that will 100% replace philanthropy or handouts of any sort. And that's generally not possible, but fueling social enterprise with impact investing helps everyone get closer to that goal. Next slide, please. There's a lot that stands in the way, though, the barriers, and I picked what, in my experience, and we wrote about in the article, are the top barriers. Stephanie has already talked about governance, so I want to start with the leadership mindset. It is often very, very difficult to have boards of directors, investment committees, CEOs, and CFOs as the first four groups that have to say, yes, we can do this and manage our risk, we can use this and manage our return. But you have to get to yes with those four groups, or impact investing will be a constant battle and unlikely to be successful. So getting to yes with those four groups is the first stop. The second thing that we hear is that, well, I don't really have enough money to do impact investing. And we would argue that that's not true, especially if the first stop on this journey is to analyze the current investment structure of your portfolio, however it might be organized, and identify ways that you can adjust what you do. For example, the pie chart that Stephanie showed earlier, where $145 million was broken apart for impact investing. It doesn't matter what the total number is. It is possible at any size. The next most important barrier is often the grant-making staff, who on the one hand in their heart will say, yes, I do understand that impact investing will help increase the pace and scale of change in the community, but program officers are typically quite wedded to I call it the liturgical process of grant making, and it's hard to go from the tradition of grant making to adding impact investing to that, but it's possible to get there. The next is the staff skill set to do impact investing, especially if you don't work for a large organization. The community foundation that I worked for is just one example, was very interested in investing across sectors in our community. So we had a geographic focus and a sector strategy. Our staff did not have the skill set across all of those sectors to do the kind of due diligence and monitoring that's required for impact investing. So the solution is to outsource that activity and to work with people who do have that as a complement to the staff who really know your community of interest well. And finally, there's the argument that Colorado Impact Days and Initiative is a big step toward resolving, where the access to investable opportunities can be closed, the gap between the investors and the social enterprises, but also foundations can use their grant side of the house to help increase the capacity of social enterprises, of nonprofit organizations, to be better at this activity. So I want to shift now back to Joanne and show you the slide about the National Impact Investing Marketplace so that you can see how nicely our country is divided up into regions that make great sense to get going on the impact investing marketplace, and regional associations of grant makers have a huge role in helping to propel this strategy. So back to you, Joanne, or off to you.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm really just going to comment briefly on the value of being involved in this collaboration, both for Colorado Association of Funders and for our members. Our organization is a diverse network of private, community, family, and corporate foundations, United Way, and some government agencies. And, you know, we have people that are really all along the spectrum, from curious to active, and just a really strong appetite for information on impact investing. We established a forum, an impact investing forum for our members around the same time that Colorado Impact Days and Initiative was getting launched here. And, you know, the build up to that, which was actually, I think, just a year ago that we were all together, was something that really complemented our own work with our members. We were able to leverage Impact Finance Center's expertise with trainings and other resources, and our members really appreciated not only that, but also Impact Days itself, because of, you know, the deep dives into legal issues, accounting, due diligence on deals was really popular. You know, the practice sessions that happened, and the marketplace itself was a huge hit. I'd say my biggest takeaway from the whole experience was how big the tent is here. Just in Colorado, we met so many people, not in our usual circles, and for me that was really exciting, meeting so many other types of philanthropists that just aren't part of our everyday foundation sector, and even, you know, of course, foundations we didn't know, and we were all in the same room for 2 to 3 days, which, you know, made for some great connections. And finally, we're part of a national network, and there are many other states that are also hungry for basic and advanced information in this marketplace concept. So you can see here, I'll use the fancy highlighter, or maybe I won't. We're right here in the middle. There's some regional groups around us, so a lot of those states are also covered. I'm hearing a lot from these folks about wanting to bring this marketplace concept to other regions, and then we just recently expanded our network to include all the national philanthropy serving organizations, which really makes the potential huge, because, you know, this is folks who are involved in all sorts of focus areas and have different memberships that may or may not overlap with our networks in states. And with that, I think I'll leave a couple minutes for questions. Turn it back to you, Terry.
Okay, thank you. So again, I want to encourage anybody with questions to please use the chat function and send them in, and we'll tee those up. We really don't have a whole lot of time, but I'm curious, Joanne, maybe you're the best person, or Kathy, to answer this. Kathy, you had talked about messages that need to get, or the 4 groups really that need to be brought on board, you know, the board, the CFO, the CEO. What messages do you find resonate most with those different audiences? Are there like certain kind of common things that they're struggling with, and have you found ways to communicate with those different audiences that are more effective than others?
Well, I think, you know, one of the key ways, and we can come back to that if you wish, is the Investor Readiness Workshop that Impact Finance Center offers. They really just sort of walk people through in a very disciplined and with lots of examples kind of way, because mostly it's out of not knowing how to even think about impact investing. So you don't really have the tools if you're a traditional investor to know how to assess risk and return. And so unpacking all of that in an educational format is really about developing not only smarts but insight. And as I said, most people are very excited about diversifying and leveraging their assets. Most people are part of a foundation because they are passionate about the mission and values of making a difference in their community of interest. And once you get all the details of how impact investing works and can be incorporated together with all the other activities that exist in investing and grant making at a foundation, most people start to be open to the kind of investing that we're talking about. Once you get there, it's not too long after that you can really get the program designed to fit your own strategic focus, your own strategic size, and your own community of interest. It's not exactly a cookie cutter, but there are lots of tools to help with that.
Okay, great. Joanne, do you have anything to add about that when you think about your members?
Well, I'll quote Stephanie Gripney on this. I don't think you said this, Dr. Gripney, but we like to joke that she likes to say that your first impact investment is a gateway drug for your next impact investment, I guess, something to that effect. So we found that if people can find a way to experiment with something small, they seem to move on and get more involved. And we actually had an interesting presentation by one of our community foundations at our forum that we just do for our members. They talked about a pilot fund that the board approved, and it was really just a pretty small fund that they could experiment with to prove the concept, and that's really what got them going. And I think that from what I hear from most of our members who are doing this is if they do one and it goes well, that sort of paves the way for the next and gets the board more comfortable.
Okay, thanks. I'm curious about one of the things that we've heard here in West Michigan as we've been talking about trying to stimulate more of this kind of investing is the investment officer who says, this is riskier. My job is to create the most return on investment, to provide the most capital for giving grants. And that seems to be a real stumbling block from the sort of it's not just the role in the foundation, it's sort of the professional investment manager ethics that they're adhering to. Have you?
Terry, I've acquired quite a point of view on that. I was the CEO of my foundation for 18 years, and because of that, went through 2 significant rounds of downturns because of the economy, 2001 to 2 and then 2008. And I am most fond of saying that if I had only had my endowment invested in impact investing in my community where I live and I know what's going to happen, I could have been $1 billion foundation by now. It is not true that your money is safer invested in the market. The volatility is greater. I mean, there is just no argument that I can come up with that would justify and defend traditional investment over impact investing, especially if within your foundation, within your risk profile, you find the right balance. This is not a 100% substitution for everybody. There are very few foundations who are 100% impact investors.
So I'll add to that real quick with Kathy. This is Steph. What we've seen, probably half of our investments around co-impact days and initiatives were from first-time donors and foundations, and most of them are on their second and third one. So that's something special and new that's been created here is we're actually getting people to exactly what Joe and Kelly said. If you do your first one, you'll do your second one. And our research, we have about 5,000 foundation transactions that kind of support that concept. But what's fascinating is within 2 years, we have one community foundation that is going to look at every single, put it on a graph, every single transaction, whether it's a grant, direct investment, or an endowment investment, financial return, risk, and liquidity. And we just met with their financial advisor, and we said the day of you maximizing their financial return is gone. Their job, they have several $100 million to make this county great, to help out with this sector. Your job is helping them to achieve their goals. And so getting a financial return in the endowment is a piece of it, but helping them, the program officers, efficiently get those dollars out the door is important, as same as the direct investments. And so we're really trying to reframe that. And we've seen one of the biggest levers for change is just a matter of great governance, means that even if you love your investment advisor, go out to an RFP process every 5 years and actually say that you want environmental social governance screening, say that you want decision-based attribution evaluation, say that you want direct investing support. And we've seen that the actual RFP is what's actually catalyzing a lot of the change with the financial services industry.
Interesting. Okay. But it also sounds like this approach to investing requires a different relationship between the investment side of the house and the program side of the house. Those are traditionally pretty separate in most foundations, as you mentioned earlier. How do you, if I'm a foundation executive and I'm interested in this, what do you suggest I do to kind of catalyze a different conversation between my investment managers and my program officers, my program staff? What's the first step I can take there?
Yeah, I can tell you back to my original point about governance and leadership that if the CEO is not 100% on board that impact investing is a great idea, the rest of the staff leaders cannot get there on their own. What my staff found at the Greater Cincinnati Foundation was that impact investing was the most remarkable team builder of any other project that we had ever done because everyone needed each other. Donor services, finance, investments, communications, grant making, they all needed each other to make this program successful, and they loved it. So I highly recommend it as team building as well as community impact.
And to follow up on what Kathy just said, we're working on new products. For example, could we actually create an insurance product equivalent to allow $200 million of a billion-dollar foundation that was currently getting less than 1% return in the markets to invest locally in their mission area? And if they do get a slightly lower financial return, we're not saying they would, if they did, could we actually use that insurance product to cover the gap of what they would have made in global markets, thereby allowing them to take 20% of their resources and actually use it towards mission? And so we're just encouraging those conversations, breaking down those barriers and having the conversation of what really is your goal with these resources. And if you don't necessarily have to bifurcate them and can bring them back together, we can actually do some more powerful work. We had a conversation with the CFO of that same community foundation. He's like, I have to make 7%. And I said, well, what if you take $1 million at the negative 100% the program officers, $1 million that you need to make 7%? Now, if you pull that money together, you have $2 million. You have to make negative, help me out, 56% financial returns. You know, so let go of bifurcating the money and potentially bring them together to solve your problems.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you. We are out of time. I wanted to just note that Colorado Impact Days 2017 will be happening this November, and I'm going to share our presenter information, and again, you'll get this separately, but I'm sure Stephanie, Joanne, or Kathy are available to answer any additional questions. Feel free to reach out to them. And finally, we will be sending, apologize for that. We will be sharing an evaluation, or asking you to complete an evaluation that's going to be hyperlinked in the Ready Talk message that we'll get as you end this webinar. If you are not a subscriber and you paid for today's webinar, please reach out to Pat at the email address on your screen there, and you can apply today's webinar fee to a subscription. So again, thank you very much, Kathy, Stephanie, and Joanne. We appreciate your sharing your expertise with us today. And again, look for more information on how to access the recording in your email shortly. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Terry.